Good evening, everyone. My name is Charms Matthew. I am a junior associate with the firm. Welcome you all to our webinar on price restrictions. I'll take a moment to introduce our speakers before we continue. So first of all, we have Mr. Dev Bajpai. Mr. Dev Bajpai is a fellow member of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India and has a law degree from University of Delhi. He completed an executive program for corporate counsels at Harvard conducted by Harvard Law School. Mr. Bajpai has been a member of the management committee of HUL since May 2010 and was inducted on the board of directors as a whole-time director with effect from January 2017. He has 30 years of experience in diverse industries that include automobiles, FMCGs, hospitality, and private equity in the areas of legal, governance, tax, and corporate affairs. In the past, he has worked with Maruti Udyog Limited, Marico Limited, Indian Hotels Company Limited, and ICICI Venture Fund Management Company Limited. He has been part of committees of industries organizations such as CII and FICCI. Mr. Bajpai has also represented the industry before parliamentary committees. And we have Mr. M.M. Sharma. Mr. M.M. Sharma is an advocate of Delhi High Court with 35 years of experience and specializes in competition law practice. He started and is heading the competition law practice in our firm, Vash Associates, since 2009 and has represented parties in many well-known competition cases before CCI, NCLT, High Court. Mr. Sharma has both regulatory and industry experience, having worked as additional registrar in the Competition Commission of India during his formative period. He also worked as head legal in Jindal Steel and Power Limited. Mr. Sharma writes occasionally on competition issues for India's leading financial newspaper like Economic Times, Financial Express, etc. We have Mr. Anand Sri, who is a senior associate in our firm with over 6 years of experience as a competition lawyer. He also has some articles to his credit. I will now request Mr. M.M. Sharma to take over and moderate the webinar now, please.
Thank you, Charles.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Charles, for this brief introduction. I welcome everybody once again to this webinar. We are privileged to have Mr. Bajpai with us, very senior General Counsel of Hindustan Unilever, well-known FMCG. So before I begin, I have my caveat as usual. Anything stated by us during this webinar does not constitute or is a substitute to a legal opinion, and the views expressed are not necessarily the views of the law firm, Vash Associates, but are personal views of each speaker. The webinar is organized for academic purposes as knowledge updation program as part of advocacy efforts. So with this caveat, I'll begin. And when we talk of competition in the markets, we're talking competition in the markets. We think of three parameters generally: price, quality, and or speed of delivery of goods or services. Of these three, the prices is the most important parameter that mostly influences the demand. So I will just share you this is the topic of our webinar: price distribution in offline and online distribution, including resale price maintenance. The panelists have been introduced. Yeah. So I'll share this slide. Just enjoy this slide with me. The price is the ultimate decider. And this slide, actually, this quotation which I've given sums up an antitrust joke. And this joke is actually quoted from a book called The Fire of Truth, A Remembrance of Law and Econ at Chicago. And what it sums up is that when the three CEOs of three large companies meet in a jail in the US, start asking each other, why are you there and why are you there? So this is what the conversation ended up. So when prices went up, the judges said, it is excessive, it is a monopoly. The prices went down, they said it was a predatory pricing. And when they stayed the same, they said it was a tacit collusion or a cartel. So this is the importance of price. So price is the ultimate decider in any market competition. And in today's webinar, when we talk of price restrictions, these are the heading which we are going to discuss. So when we talk of price restrictions, so we're talking the vertical context, the vertical restrictions between manufacturers and distributors, the specific context of pricing of produced products for resale to dealers and understand the issue which emerge. So during this webinar, we will discuss the specific issues of pricing arrangement, as I said, between manufacturers and dealers and how they affect the common man, because ultimately the price the customer has to pay. So when we talk of vertical restraint, whether in offline or online sale, we are speaking broadly about three categories, three broad categories. Either we have dealing restrictions, like exclusive supply, exclusive dealing arrangements, or pricing restrictions, including maximum or minimum resale price maintenance, MRP, dual pricing. There are two-part tariffs, rebates, discounts, etc., and non-pricing restrictions such as tying in, bundling, refusal to deal, etc. So the competition law on vertical restraint remains the most contentious, since it deals with the day-to-day issues faced by both upstream and downstream market players that influence the demand and supply in the market. Now if you remember, we discussed exclusivity in our first webinar on 5th June in some detail and discussed the similar issues on online distribution, including in the context of e-commerce, in our last webinar of 19th June. We have taken a big gap, but then there was a reason. So I will start with reiterating three broad conclusions, some broad conclusion which came in the context of competition assessment of vertical restraints based on the settled jurisprudence and economic literature. So these three broad conclusions which I'm going to give right now will run through the entire presentation. So I would request you to kindly pay some attention to this. So the substantial law of competition analysis of vertical restraints of both price related as well as non-price related remains the same. That such restraints are harmful only when the parties involved have significant market power or in dominant position, and when they possess the ability to foreclose the market. The theory of harm of possibility of foreclosure of the market for potential competition is the foremost. It always remains. The second conclusion is that when a given vertical restraint, whether a given vertical restraint is anti-competitive in a given situation, would depend in particular on the degree of inter-brand competition. So where inter-brand competition is vigorous, it is unlikely that a vertical restraint will have significant or appreciable adverse effect on competition, and even if it reduces the intra-brand competition. So where both inter-brand and intra-brand competitions are vigorous, there is even a less danger of a vertical restraint having any significant or appreciable adverse effect on competition. However, where the inter-brand competition is weak, vertical restraint can potentially lead to foreclosure or to softening of price competition. So this is the second conclusion which has emerged from the economic literature. And of course, in the Indian context, the vertical restraints can either be examined under Section 4 of the Competition Act, that is for abuse of dominant position, or under Section 3, subsection 4 of the Act, that is under the rule of reason test for vertical restraints. The benchmark remains the same, appreciable adverse effect on competition, or as we explained them the last webinar in detail for the e-commerce. So we have the slide, we have divided our discussion in these topics. So first we'll discuss price restrictions in general in distribution. Then we'll come to the resale price maintenance, then what are the advantages, etc., of RPM, etc., and T and pro-competitive effects of RPM. It's called RPM. And then we'll also discuss assessment of RPM across jurisdictions. And we are taking only two jurisdictions, the EU and the US. Then I'll also talk about dual pricing and the jurisprudence of India, and so far we will also discuss what are the main cases which have and how they have how they are evolving the jurisprudence. And then at the last we'll discuss emerging issues in e-commerce. So how I'm going to take this forward is that I will, after I finish a particular topic, I'm going to involve the other speakers, and then we'll have a panel discussion, a few questions we'll exchange, and then we proceed like this. So let me proceed with the first topic, that is price restrictions in distribution. So you can see that price restrictions in distribution, why are they imposed, first of all? What is the reason? What is the logic behind it? Naturally, a manufacturer who has produced goods would like to optimize its profits, and he has to optimize it through his retailers only. A manufacturer does not go down to the market directly. He can't sell it directly. So he has to hire, or he has to have agreement with the retailers. And this is feasible only when manufacturer is open. But another thing is, which see the next bullet, that when does price restriction is actually feasible? When the manufacturer is actually able to monitor the actual prices charged by the retailer. For example, in the mass products, the manufacturer believes that it knows the level of the final demand. So if it believes that it can actually know what price the retailer will be charging, then only will indulge in price restriction. And the third thing, that in cases where the restriction is not possible, for example, where the final price is reached after bargaining with the customer, the manufacturer uses the vertical restriction, other verticals such as quantity fixation, etc. and it employs both direct and indirect methods. So between pricing arrangement between upstream and downstream players are most common and form the first point on which an agreement for dealership is reached. I think you will agree with me. If you're a manufacturer and you have to appoint dealers in a particular city, the first thing you'll ask is how will we share the margins? What kind of, how we're going to sell our products. So price is the first point of discussion which comes, and an agreement has to be reached on that issue between the two. And this becomes when does it become a competition issue? It becomes a competition issue when the manufacturer tries to fix either price of each category of product specifically under a policy or gives a price level. So the question of competition law emerges. It's very normal for a manufacturer to fix its margin with the dealers, but when does competition law trigger it? The competition law will trigger it only when the manufacturer either specifically fixes the price of a particular product or gives a price level that you can sell only between this band, right? And within which the dealer has to sell. So such restrictions are actually, as I take you further, how they are enforced through both direct and indirect means. So let us see. So the direct means are, of course, by either by an agreement, you and the dealership agreement, you agree on the prices, or through concerted practices between manufacturers and distributors that either directly fix the retail price, it could be a maximum price, or it could be a minimum price, or by indirect means. So indirect means could also be by agreements or concerted practice. By concerted practice, I mean that I have seen in many cases there are no actually written agreements, but there is an understanding between the sales team of the manufacturer and the dealer that, well, this is how you're going to sell. If you want our dealership, we'll have a simple dealership agreement. There will be nothing of this sort will be mentioned, but this is what our understanding is. So they will communicate through either emails or whatever. So when the upstream manufacturer is not able to enforce price restriction of his choice directly under a written agreement, he tries to enforce them through other alternative methods, such as quantity fixing or forcing. And if he happens to be a monopolist, through what is known as single branding or exclusive supply agreement, which we discussed in the first webinar on exclusivity, or through rebates, which could be either target or volume-based rebates or loyalty-inducing rebates. So in principle, most rebates or discounts based on volume are simple manifestations of the competitive process. So naturally, a manufacturer is interested in selling its product more and more. It would like that its product should sell more in the market. So it will naturally incentivize the dealer that if you sell more, I'm ready to give you more discount on what you purchase. So volume-based discounts or targeted discounts or rebates are very, very common, and they are very, very perfectly normal. Nothing wrong in that. So, but unless the rebates are given by a dominant supplier, suppose the supplier or the manufacturer happens to be a dominant player, which is either selling at a loss with predatory intention, that could be the case, or forces the dealer to obtain 100% or majority of the supplies through it, that you will buy your entire demand for this particular product through me. So it's called exclusive supply agreement, or in Europe we call it single branding. It could be even quantity forcing. So say, okay, not 100%, you will take at least majority, say 80% through me. So then the rebates become a problem. Otherwise, the rebates are not suspected under competition law unless it is shown that the rebates are detrimental to the fair competitive process and lead to harm to the consumer. So I will deal a little bit about the rebates, because rebates is a very important subject, which is I'm going to cover this pricing restrictions topic. And of course, the other modes could be reselling, linking to the resale price of the competitors, or even threat, intimidation, warning, penalties, delays or suspension of deliveries, and even termination of dealerships. And they're not uncommon. We have seen cases which have come to the CCI, the dealership was terminated, threat was given that if you don't agree with this, we'll do this. And I will deal, as I proceed, I'll show you, I will discuss this also. So now let me spend some time brief on the rebates. So how the rebates are seen. So rebates could be either volume-based rebates, as I said, target rebates based on the amount of sales which you do, or it could be loyalty or fidelity or even conditional rebates by dominant firms that have effect similar to single branding agreement by tying the purchases of a formal obligation to buy all or most of the requirements from the dominant supplier. And such kind of loyalty inducing rebates have been prohibited as abuse of dominance, but provided they are by dominant players. So that I'm repeating, I'm emphasizing the word dominance. Please keep it in mind. We can give you the examples of famous cases of Hoffmann-La Roche, and dues post, etc. in the Europe. But it does not mean that dominant firms cannot offer rebates to the dealers at all. I'm not saying that. Dominant players, they are not prohibited from giving rebates. And the obvious method is to set a target, that the volume-based rebates are always open to them. That you set a target and then promise a rebate of the target to meet during a certain period. You can incentivize that. You can have promotional schemes, by all means. And such individualized targets for volume-based rebates, even by dominant firms, are quite common to increase sales and cannot be questioned. Even as per the European Union guidelines, it is important to distinguish two questions. First, whether a rebate could have loyalty-inducing effects. And second, whether such loyalty-inducing rebate could have an anti-competitive foreclosure effect also. So both tests have to be satisfied. If you are a dominant supplier or a dominant firm, you can even give a loyalty-inducing rebate. Even that is not a problem. But the moment that loyalty-inducing rebate start harming the competition, start producing a foreclosure effect, then the problem starts. So these two effects are different, since a rebate might have loyalty-inducing effect without necessarily being harmful to competition. So I'm putting a caveat here. So even loyalty-inducing rebates are okay to an extent, provided they don't foreclose the market. That means that you might give similar treatment to other dealers also. I hope I'm clear that a loyalty-inducing rebate is fine, provided it is applied uniformly across the dealers. So then it will not foreclose the market. So interestingly, even such volume-based or so-called target-based rebates are also under question, have also been questioned in mature jurisprudence like Europe, where they are applied not transparently or discriminately. So what I'm trying to say is that the target-based rebates have to be applied uniformly, as I said, to all dealers, and not based on whether the supplier or whether the supplier has transparent policy or not. So you have to have a transparent, fair discount policy in place, even if you are a dominant player, if you don't want to be scrutinized by the commission. So I give you one example. So in the Michelin case, this very old case of Michelin, so the European Commission condemned the volume-based discount payable to dealers for replacement of tires in the Netherlands because Michelin set individualized targets for dealers, which kept on increasing every year. And this rebate was, although it was volume-based, but it was not transparent. There was a lack of transparency, and the dealers were discriminated between customers in setting volume-based rebates, and that constituted an abuse of dominance. The later case, which you all must be knowing perhaps, is the Intel case. The Intel case is another classic example in Europe of how dominant firms can use targeted or volume-based rebates to indulge in predatory pricing. I won't spend time because it's a well-known case. It came in the newspapers. Intel was targeting the wholesalers of the computer selling devices and the PCs, that if you don't launch the the computer having the Linux or the other competitors chip, then I will give you huge discount. And even Intel was accused of giving actual cash discounts. So in India also, by the way, we have had a case very recently, which I'll spend some time. And this is a case of a dominant player, giving discounts which were questioned, which were not basically transparent, which were not fair, and the rebates were non-transparent, and they were applied discriminatory manner, and also the grant of rebates was linked to the conditions which were not normal. So supplemental obligations were put in. And this Grasse was found by the CCI of having abused its dominant position in the market for supply of VSF, viscous staple fiber, to spinners in India by charging discriminatory prices to its customers and by imposing supplementary obligation on its customers, and also for adopting unfair discriminatory pricing practices and from seeking consumption details of VSF from buyers. Grasim has been found to have abused its dominant position, and a penalty of 301 crore has been imposed. I'll take a minute to explain this case because it's a very important case, and it's a very recent case. The order is of 16th March. So how this case actually happened? I'll just take a minute to explain to that, because there are certain things which we must know. That this is not a practice which is confined to Europe. In fact, in India, the jurisprudence on RPO is very, very scarce, very little. There are hardly few cases. And as my colleague Anand Sri will take you through some cases which we have selected for today's webinar. So we have to look to Europe. But in India, this particular case of Grasim actually is an interesting example how the commission has looked into it. So what was going on was that Grasim was, it was a dominant player because it was having about 95% share in the market for supply of viscous staple fiber. And it was selling the VSF at a low rates to its international customers. And the same product was sold at a much higher price to the domestic customers. The allegation was that the Grasim had segmented the domestic customers into two categories. Domestic customers who manufacture and supply yarn for the domestic market, and domestic manufacturer who manufacture the yarn for export. So either you are a deemed exporter in the terminology of Grasim, or you are only a domestic supplier. The two categories were made. It was also alleged that the Grasim forces its domestic customers to submit their monthly yarn production data for calculating the discount rate applicable to them, and follows a non-transparent practice while invoicing and refuses to disclose the discount policies to its customers. So Grasim actually had a target based on an individualized rebate system, which it was giving from customer to customer. And then the allegation was also there. So CCI actually analyzed it, and it also noticed certain things that what was the abuse? Basically, dominance, of course, was seen because it was found that Grasim was a hugely dominant player with about 95% market share in the market for supply of VSF. And then another allegation which was very interesting was that Grasim was not allowing the sale of this viscous staple fiber in the open market. So trading was also stopped. So if you have to take a rebate from Grasim, and if you are a spinner, you have to tell Grasim that for what purpose you want to use it. So you cannot take that product and sell it in the open market. So there was no alternative source of that fiber in India except that of Grasim. There were imports were allowed, but they were anti-dumping duty imposed on the behest of Grasim by China. Because, as I said, Grasim had 95% market share. So 95% means that it represents more than 50% of the industry. So anti-dumping proceeding it could start. It did and got imposed. And then, of course, it was importing from Thailand and Indonesia from its own subsidiaries. So basically, there was no doubt about this dominance. The abuse part was, as I said, it was not only putting the discriminatory conditions of discount on the spinners, but also it was imposing conditions which were not actually normal in this. We never heard of such conditions, that you to give the detail of how much you've exported, every monthly production yarn, monthly export data, and monthly to whom you supplied, who are your customers. Everything was to be shown to the Grasim as per the allegations. And so there were two allegations basically of imposing unfair and discriminating pricing and sale of VSF, and imposing conditions which were supplemental. So imposing supplemental conditions for sale of viscous staple fiber. Now the point I'm trying to make in this case is, this was not a case of a volume-based discount. Mind you, Grasim was not giving discount based on the volume. In fact, it was the reverse, because it was found that domestic suppliers who were actually buying more quantity were ending up paying up more as compared to international, as compared to those spinners who were exporting it, though they were taking less, but they were also paying less. So it was actually quite disproportionate. The volume, if it was a volume-based discount, then the people who buy more should have been given more discount, but that was just the reverse. So what I'm trying to say is, this is the only case in India so far in which this rebates comes out very openly. Of course, this case is in appeal, the matter is sub judice. So with this, I think I should stop for a minute, and I should ask involve my friends from the panel. So I'll come to Mr. Vajpayee. Mr. Vajpayee, can you please unmute yourself? And come on the screen kindly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see you. Thank you. So I have two
Good evening.
Mr. Vajpayee, thank you very much and welcome to this panel discussion. So before we proceed further, I have one or two questions from you, if you please consider this. So what, according to you, are the business justifications for price restrictions by suppliers and manufacturers? So we discussed price restrictions in general till now. So this is the first question, sir. The second question I would also like to ask you is, Can you throw some light on the volume-based discount policy followed by your company, Hindustan Unilever, or even Unilever globally? And specifically, does Hindustan Unilever follow a uniform discount-based and transparent discount policy, or a targeted volume-based rebate policy for each dealer, as I discussed? So these two questions, if you can please explain, take some time.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Sharma, and thank you for having me for this webinar. There's a lot of echo that I can hear. I don't know whether it is clear to you or not.
No, you're absolutely clear, sir. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay. So, from a manufacturer's perspective, it is not just pricing restriction, but it should be seen in the context of the pricing strategy and what are the business considerations that go into putting in place a pricing strategy. So if I have to take our example, we play in multiple categories. We have 27 categories. We have several brands that we deploy, and we've got three major businesses: personal care, home care, and food and refreshments. Now, when I put in place a pricing strategy, obviously, I have to play my portfolio. I have to look at my portfolio. I have to look at my customers, my consumers across my portfolio. And my brands are deployed to serve consumers across the pyramid, from top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid. And what is the value that I give to the consumer? What is the price pyramid within which I'm operating? So these are some of the business considerations which one has to consider before really putting pricing in place. And pricing would definitely be a subject matter of some of these considerations. The other part that you asked about,
So the discount policy, what kind of discount policy do you follow, sir?
Look, Mr. Sharma, we have a conventional value chain FMCG model. We are also present through e-com, but given we have about 3,500 distributors in our general trade across the country, our dealings with our distributors is highly transparent, and we deal with one another as independent contractors. We have a detailed distribution agreement, which clearly brings out what is our obligation, what is their obligation, and we clearly state in a very transparent manner in that agreement that we have a stake in them. When I say we have a stake in them, it means we have a stake in developing them, in giving them the best processes and systems to be able to serve the consumer better. Now, coming specifically to the issue of discounts and rebates, etc., anyone, like you rightly said, would want to maximize sales, and therefore obviously we will look at our secondary sales and sales targets which are being delivered. But more importantly, since I said we have a stake in them and we work towards enhancing their efficiency so that the overall market works better and there is, the system is more efficient and we are able to serve the consumer better, we also have something which is a differentiated variable model where we do incentivize the distributor, not just basis the sales target met, but also on the basis of things like assortment, things like bill productivity, things like efficiency on the ground, number of salesmen deployed, their absenteeism. So it's a series of parameters and KPIs, and that depends upon the growth priorities for each market, for each distributor. But it's a very, very transparent and open way of working. And, the whole objective is to reach our products in the most optimum time, in the most optimum way at reduced cost, but in the most efficient way through our distributors to the consumers.
No, sir, I'm quite clear, but I just wanted to ask a very specific question once again, that you just said the word transparent. So what I'm trying to ask you, you are a company present all over India, right?
Yes.
So say for Bombay, say for the city of Mumbai, the dealers which are present in the city of Mumbai, I just want to ask you that the policies which you have are uniformly applied.
Yes.
Volume based, or
yes.
Say it may be different from the policies, say for Punjab, say for Delhi. Right. I can understand that because every region has its own scale of development. But as far as a
Yeah.
particular geography is concerned, my only concern is that whether you apply them uniformly. Unlike
Yes.
what the Grasim doing, sorry to say. You
Right.
understand? I just explained that case to you. So
Yeah,
I just wanted to know that HUL being a very uh, consumer-focused company, as I can see, I'm sure the dealers are also happy. I just wanted to know that. I'm sure they are
absolutely.
happy. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
so I'm very happy to confirm what you just said.
No, that's what it should be. That's how a perfect competition should work.
But
So
having
now,
said that, Mr. Sharma, I just also want to mention, like I said earlier, there are very clear-cut KPIs for distributors, and these could evolve, these could change. But for a set of distributors in the same location, the KPIs are quite similar.
all right. Understood, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Now, can I turn to my colleague Anand Sri? Anand, can you come on screen, please? Can you unmute yourself and show yourself?
Hi.
Welcome, Anand. So the question to you is, we just discussed the case of Grasim. So can you please explain the, other than this particular case, which is very recent of 16th March order, are there some other cases where legality of rebates have been examined by the commission? Very fast, in another 2-3 minutes, because we have to see. Thank you.
Sir, like you already discussed while mentioning the Grasim case, the Commission has already dealt with the issue of quantity rebates in the Shubham sanitary ware case. The Commission has upheld the legality of quantity-based rebates, where Commission is of the view that if a buyer or a retailer is off-taking more of a good, he is entitled to more discount than a retailer who is off-taking less of it. Therefore, if I am off-taking 100 units of a product, I am entitled to more discount than somebody who is off-taking only 10 or 15 units of the particular good. The second issue, what we have seen a lot recently, is with respect to the e-commerce market in India. And the Commission has been dealing with a lot of allegation, dealing with deep discounting, which is a practice where products sold on platforms are available at a considerably discounted prices than what is available offline stores. What is interesting is that deep discounting, although initially it has been alleged as a predatory pricing offense, is now being examined by the CCI in the context of exclusivity. This is because what the Commission has observed is that, number one, none of the platforms or the e-commerce players are dominant in their own sense. Therefore, it cannot be examined for an abuse of dominance in case of predatory pricing. Rather, what the Commission has observed is that these discounts are only offered to certain sellers, that is preferred sellers.
Right.
Platforms have their own preferred sellers on their platforms, and these discounts are only offered to those preferred sellers. Therefore, again, the Commission is seeing it as a discriminatory practice which the e-commerce platform is seeing.
Thank you.
And this has been examined in the context of exclusivity.
Correct. No, you're right. Absolutely right. So we discussed that in our earlier webinar on vertical sales on e-commerce. Of course, we can't repeat that. But the point is that the question of rebates have to be what we are taking from this particular portion is that the rebates, if at all, have to be uniform. They have to be non-discriminatory. That's the point I'm trying to make at the end of this. So this you can take from this particular part of the session, this message. So now let me proceed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now I proceed with the next part of the webinar. I request you to continue with us. Thank you very much, sir. So now I come to the price restrictions and distribution. This slide is also the same thing we are going to say, that what are the modes of enforcement of price restrictions, both direct and indirect, as I said, either through price monitoring system. Now please have a look at this. So how prices are monitored? They have price monitoring systems are there. There are discount control systems, and they are either obliging or incentivizing retailers to report violators, and even employing third-party agencies to monitor actual retail prices like mystery shopping or decoy customers, and by printing recommended resale price on the product, by directing the distributor to apply a most favored nation clause, that you will match the, you will give the best treatment to this person, or by recommending a maximum retail price, or by recommending a minimum retail price. So of all these price restrictions we have just listed in this slide, the last bullet is what is actually we are concerned with today in the next, as we proceed, the minimum retail price. So by recommending a minimum retail price. So this is the what is called as resale price maintenance. Please have a look at this. We have just tried to summarize what is resale price maintenance. Actually, essentially it means fixing of price by manufacturer for resale of the product by the dealers and not by the dealers as per the competitive price determined by markets. Please note that a manufacturer and dealer are separate legal entities. We are not talking of agency agreement. We are talking of pure and simple distributor. So he buys those products from the manufacturer and he has to sell them in the market. The distributor may have its own margin at which it will purchase. That is separate. But beyond that, legally speaking, the manufacturer has no right to tell the dealer at what price he will sell, because the price will be determined by the market, the demand of the product, the quality of the product, and things like that. I told you the competition is only on 3 parameters: either price, quality, or speed of delivery. Pizza, pizza, and for example, these 2 pizza brands, they compete. Who will send the pizza in half an hour? So that is a delivery, that's a competition on that. So basically, resale price maintenance means that fixing the price vertically by the manufacturer. It's called vertical price fixing cartel. It's as good as cartel. And the resale, but the element of resale is very important. So for resale price maintenance to take place, there has to be resale. Agreement between producer and dealer to set downstream prices are essential, and they are prohibited by law only when either party is dominant. That is, of course, another point which I said at the beginning that will run through the entire presentation. Only they are either dominant or have a significant market power. But it will not include distribution by agents or direct selling. Please keep that in mind. So if you have agency agreement, that is not included in the resale price maintenance, because that is when you are considered as what is called a single economic entity. So please see what is the legal definition of this resale price maintenance in the competition law in India. So resale price maintenance includes any agreement to sell goods on condition that the prices to be charged on the resale by the purchaser shall be the prices stipulated by the seller, unless it is clearly stated that prices lower than that may be charged. In section 3, subsection 4. So fixing the minimum resale price is not per se. But here, before I proceed to the next, let me just give you a background of resale price maintenance, how this is done. So developed economies, RPM is taken very seriously, and we can see that, and we'll see it later. It's considered almost equivalent to cartel between suppliers and their dealers. This is because it may facilitate collusion between suppliers and manufacturers by enhancing transparency in the market. This makes it easier to detect when a supplier deviates from a collusion prices by reducing interbrand competition. It may also undermine the incentive for suppliers to cut the prices to distributors, as fixed resale price prevents it from expanding sales. It even undermines and reduces the intra-brand price competition among retailers, or even facilitate collusion among dealers. It may lower the margin for manufacturers, particularly in the case of commitment problems are there. So these are issues which have been, there's a plethora of literature available in Europe and America or developed economies on resale price maintenance. And as we'll see later, there is a difference of treatment of this resale price maintenance between the two, as you call, across the continent. We'll deal that with later. But the point is that in general, the adverse effect on competition depends, as I said in the beginning, upon the market position of the supplier. The stronger the market position of the supplier, the higher the risk that even a minimum or recommended, that is even a maximum or even recommended resale price lead to more or less uniform resale price level across which all other retailers will sell as a focal point, which may constitute akin like a cartel among dealers. So what I'm trying to say that if suppose you are a dominant player, you're a strong player, your brand is so strong, and you fix a resale price for a particular dealer. So naturally the competition will set in. So even if you not fix it for the other dealer, the other dealer will come to know that this is the price at which the other person is selling, so he'll also try to sell at the same price. So this will follow, a chain will be made. So all dealers will sell at the same price. So this is the effect. So the intra-brand competition goes. Technically speaking, if there is no resale price maintenance, every dealer will compete to sell at a lower price. So that's why the last bullet, please have a look at it. In a perfect competition, after sale of the product to the dealer, manufacturers do right. As I said, the market should decide. So let us see now what are the anti-competitive effects. I just summed up, I just slowly mentioned, but you can, let's have a look at them once again. So intra-brand competition is eliminated because of this. it may lead to rising prices. Downstream market. It can even facilitate collusion between suppliers. It can collusion could take place on price setting strategies can be created, help secure excessive business margin at the different levels of the market, and eliminates price competition at the retail level, thereby foreclosing competition, as I said. So the main focus, the main thrust of the resale price maintenance law is competition law issue is that this actually kills the competition between the dealers. It can also kill competition between the brands to an extent. So inter-brand is also affected, and it's both intra-brand also affected. So RPM, as I said, is considered as a per se violation in Europe. It's illegal per se. And as we'll say, even in the US, it was considered as per se illegal. But in India, we have taken a slightly different approach because we have also taken into account what are the benefits arising out of this. So let's see the next slide. What are the possible pro-competitive effects of this practice? So it addresses the free rider problem, for example. So this slide, if you can see, seek advice on product from one retailer and buys from another. The customer can do it. So, or you can buy online after you search online and you go to offline, buy from a store. So free rider problems are taken care. And it may lead to efficiencies also in distribution, particularly where a manufacturer introduces or launches a product. Incentivizes a distributor during the introductory period to make product specific investment in the promotion of a product. It creates brand also, by the way. So for some time, say in a franchisee system, this may be helpful for some time. It's not that you should have a long period. So for a short term, a low price campaign, 2 to 6 weeks in most cases, will benefit the consumer also. And the extra margin provided by the RPM may even allow resellers to provide some additional pre-sale services, particularly in the case of experience or very complicated products, complex products. So the resale prices and not just maximum resale prices, it is necessary to organize a franchise system, as I said. So these are the pros and cons of resale price maintenance. And I will again involve my panelists after this. So I will put a few questions to Mr. Vajpayee. Mr. Vajpayee will trouble you once again. Will you please appear once again on the screen, sir? Mr. Vajpayee, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sir, I have a few questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
I'm sure you will say, Mr. Sharma, you're troubling me a lot. But that's how we sort of thought of making this particular section of this presentation, sir.
Not a problem at all.
So kindly bear with me, sir. I'll give you a few questions, please. So my first question is, what according to you are the advantages of resorting to RPM by manufacturers? So I discussed with you both the anti-competitive as well as pro-competitive effects. You have been in the industry for long. So do you think, can RPM help small businesses in your views? If so, how?
Look, Mr. Sharma, I feel that at core and in essence, it's anti-competitive RPM. It ends up increasing prices. But there could be some situations, like you also articulated in this slide, where the impact of RPM, or it could lead to some good effect. But those are, to my mind, for a very short period of time. If at all they are deployed, they should be deployed for a short period of time and not, because what it can do is, it can lead to a situation where the price equation can be spoiled in the market. It can lead to a situation where distributors can overprice, and it doesn't really help in the long run. Equally, for a small manufacturer, if he's got a wonderful proposition, if he's got a product that works, if the product is hero, he could, do this for some time, and whatever extra resources are, he's able to generate, he can plow back in the business, ultimately to become more efficient. But like I said, it isn't a long-term strategy, because at core it remains the free market operation against the concept of free market.
So you agree with me that RPM actually is considered as an anti-competitive practice generally, though it may help some small business for a small period of time, initially. Very nice. And the next question, if I can put another question to you, is Are these instances where are there any instances where it becomes necessary for the manufacturers to maintain a floor price to preserve the brand image or quality perceptions of a good? So since you belong to a company which is very well known in India, I think this question you can easily respond.
Yeah. Look, again, yes, you're right. I mean, for us, if we, like I said, if in our categories, if we have to serve consumers across the pyramid, we have to have some price equation as well. Of course, it is our responsibility to ensure that the consumer gets value for money, which we always ensure. But yes, from a perception angle, from an image angle, pricing is important. So long as the manufacturer is giving the value to the consumer, it is important. Let me give you an example. If I take a category like detergents, we have
Right.
a brand like Surf Excel, which is on the top, then we've got Rin, and then we've got Wheel. Now, all of them have got different propositions and they are differently priced. Similarly,
All right.
we have big packs, we have smaller packs. So, this is something where it is important. But what should be ultimately ensured is that the consumer gets the value for which she's paying.
All right, very nice. No, I appreciate that. Because I agree with you that a floor price has to be given because you definitely take into account your cost, cost of the production and all those things, and plus profit margin of the not only you but also the dealer. So all that things are. So floor price, I agree. Now the third question to you, sir, is: do abnormally low prices affect the brand image and the subsequent sales of the good? Now, this is a very, I hope you understand what I'm trying to ask you.
I
Because,
understand.
sasta hai wo acha nahi hota hai, as you call it in the market, no? So if it's costly, it's good. The perception is there.
Yeah, I know, sir, but again, it depends which sector or which SEC or LSM that you are catering to. LSM stands for Living Standard Measure. Is it a high LSM consumer? Is it a low LSM consumer? Because when you straddle the pyramid, you have to provide an offering for each consumer, top of the pyramid, bottom of the pyramid. But you're right, there is perception that if the price is too little or it's very it's cheap, maybe the quantity or the quality is not good, which is actually wrong, and that perception is now going away because you're pricing for the value that you're giving to the consumer, and that's the challenge that the manufacturers have to ensure that they follow all the time.
So particularly, Mr. Vajpayee will agree with me that after the internet commerce has come, e-commerce has come, the prices have naturally come down. So this, this differentiation between the price and the quality, this perception which earlier people had, I think this is slowly waning.
Yes.
Because now
absolutely.
you got very good quality products available at very cheap prices online. And
Yes.
since you are also a company which is, whose products are available online, I'm sure you will agree with me.
Yes.
So the earlier perception of lower prices meaning lower quality, I don't think it is any more valid, or at least
Yes.
it's going to be very, very soon obsolete. I hope you will agree with me here. Thank
I
you very
agree.
much. Yeah. So the next question, sir, I'm going to put you is: should the manufacturer not be in a position to suggest maximum and minimum retail price to its wholesale sellers, distributors, or retailers? It's a very straight question. I know the answer, but still, for the sake of record, I'm asking you, sir, that do you think that the manufacturer should be not allowed the liberty to put that minimum or maximum benchmark? What is wrong in it? After all, it's all product belonging to him. Why can't he do it?
Look, again, it boils down to what the regulation provides, and it, like you rightly said earlier, that if you're dominant or if you can
That is
lead
the
to
answer.
appreciable adverse effect on competition, it can be, completely misconstrued. So while there is a degree of flexibility that is given, but as a company, as a corporation, we, Mr. Sharma, always recommend the price. We give our distributors the option to give to give more discounts, and our guidance to them is only with respect to recommendatory price. In fact, in our own invoice, we have a field for discounts and other discounts, so we give fullest liberty to our distributors to charge lower amounts than what is the MRP, what is the recommended MRP. But you're right, at the end of the day, it is a degree of flexibility is required. So long as you are not dominant, it doesn't create an adverse effect on competition, some amount of flexibility should be there.
In fact, I'll take a step further than what you said, sir. I'll take a cue from you. So if you are a firm which is just entering the market, or if you are a new, or if you are one of those thousands of firms which are selling a product, for example, the small and micro enterprises, right? I'm not talking of medium because now the medium has become 250 crore. It's a big, they've changed the definition of medium enterprise. So small and micro enterprises which are competing between themselves, this could be very useful.
Yes.
Because actually it's not going to have effect on competition because they would normally not have a significant market power.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to sell is that this may be useful for the normal manufacturers or dealers who are plenty in India, you know. So we have a few who are, yeah, please.
Yeah, and I think for that reason, the in India we followed the section 3(4) approach of rule of reason.
Rule of reason, absolutely.
And not really per se approach, because government also recognizes that it may not lead to any significant adverse effect on competition,
correct,
but it could be in some situations useful, and in the situation that you described for small and micro enterprises.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for spending time. So now we proceed with the next part of the session, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. So now let us see how the RPM is assessed across these two jurisdictions. So as I was telling that we are taking the European Union first. So under the European Union competition rules, manufacturers should not take any action that interfere with the freedom of retailers to set their final prices to customers by making even a recommended retail price or a maximum retail price equivalent to minimum or fixed price. So agreements that establish a minimum or fixed resale price or price range are considered as a hardcore restriction, and they are deemed to affect competition by object. So in Europe, there is an effect-based test and there is an object-based test. So the restriction which have the object of suppressing competition are per se or bad, or they are hardcore restrictions. So this RPM is considered as per se illegal because it's presumed that this actually restricts competition by object. As I said, of all the three parameters, price is the foremost and most important parameter of competition. So if by an agreement you were to suppress that ability of a dealer to sell as per the market competitive price, then Europe takes it very seriously. They say it's absolutely illegal, no questions asked. Whether it is maximum or recommendatory, they don't care. So that's what the law is. So the 101 of the TFU, the Treaty for the European Economic Union, considers it as a hardcore restriction under 101(3) and within the meaning of Article 4A. At the same time, the practice of recommending a resale price or requiring a retailer to respect a maximum retail price is exempted. But it's not that it is not possible for a manufacturer in Europe to even suggest a maximum price. So there are escape routes available, and there is a vertical block exemption regulation in Europe which allows the party to take block exemption in respect of a particular deal. So if your market share, and they've got very, very clear-cut thresholds in terms of market share. So at the same time, so that's what I'm saying, that VBR, I call it in short vertical block exemption regulation, provides that a market share threshold set out in the regulation, if they're not exceeded, then the recommendation does not amount to a minimum or fixed resale price. So then it may not be per se illegal. So if the threshold is a 30%. So manufacturers and retailers frequently monitor their online retail prices and by means of pricing software. Now, I'm talking in terms of online sales. How do they monitor it? It is easier to detect deviations from manufacturers' pricing recommendations. So as I said in the last bullet, they can claim block exemption under Article 103 of the TFU, provided they can provide justification for that. And there are four major criteria of allowing the justification of the exemption. They are justifiability, the objective justification, proportionality, and not leading to removal of competition completely, and the benefit should pass on to the consumer. So there are four well-established tests in the European guidelines, under which you can seek these block exemptions. So manufacturers do that, and they do take benefit of that particular block exemption. So this actually allows manufacturers to retaliate against retailers that have deviate from the. Now I'm talking about the online sales. So this tool of watching the price at which the retailer is selling Nowadays, we got softwares, we got algorithms are there, and the algorithms can detect the deviations from manufacturer reselling price, and this allows the manufacturer, as I said, to retaliate against retailers who do that from the desired price level, and it may even limit the incentive for retailers to deviate from such pricing recommendation in the first place. So, increased online price transparency may also facilitate or strengthen collusion between retailers by making it easier to detect deviation from the collusion agreement. So in turn, it could reduce the incentive for retailers to deviate from collusive price by inhibiting the expected gains from such deviation. So basically in Europe, what we are trying to say is there are possibilities, there are cases which are there, but basically the point is that they have a very strict regime on RPM, and this is considered hard restriction. And unless the block exemption principles are met, it is not allowed. So now let's proceed to the US. In the US, as I said, for 100 years, from 1911, as you can see this bullet, RPM was considered as per se legal. It was just considered like a cartel, a vertical cartel. And the Dr. Miles case, which I've just noted in the red, 1911 set that tone. But in 2007, recently the US Supreme Court overruled the decision in this case of Legion Creative Leather and held that the RPM should be subject to rule of reason. So now more and more cases of rule of reason. Now the per se rule is gone, and in the US, the even RPM is considered as with the rule of reason, the analysis which we even in India also follow. So as we have said earlier, we were discussing, Mr. Vaswani also saying that subsection 3, subsection 4 talks of vertical restraints in the context of only when they have appreciable adverse effect on competition. So there is a rule of reason applied. Each restriction is seen from the angle of possibility of foreclosure, degree of foreclosure, and creating entry barrier. There are specific factors laid down in the section 19.3. So that is what we have created, and I think India has taken this cue from the US that they have gone by rule of reason. But there is a doctrine called Colgate doctrine. I'll just take a minute to explain that, because some of you may not be aware that in 1919, the case of Colgate actually was found that the Sherman Act does not prevent a manufacturer from announcing in advance the prices at which the goods may be sold, and then refusing to deal with the distributor and retailers that do not respect those prices. Very unique case. So Colgate was found to have sort of being smart in avoiding this, Dr. Miles' decision of per se legality. So it announced its prices for resale, publicly, and then dealers who did not agree with that, they refused to deal with them. So that's called Colgate doctrine, because according to Colgate, there was no agreement. So resale price maintenance has to be agreed upon between two parties. So if you don't have an agreement between your dealer and the manufacturer, but if you're just offering it, and if he agrees to not take it, then that be it. So we are not violating the RPM. So businesses, with some exceptions, have no general antitrust law obligations to do business with any particular company, and can thus unilaterally terminate distributor without antitrust consequences. That's what was said in this case. So in US, at the moment, both federal and state antitrust laws focuses on the agreement aspect of the resale price maintenance agreement. So if a company unilaterally announces minimum prices at which resellers must sell its products or face termination, the company is not, strictly speaking, entering an agreement. But again, antitrust lawyers' advice should be taken. It's not that simple. But just put it in a very abstract manner. So there are agency agreement, as I said, the agency agreement also out. So if you appoint an agent, for example, then maybe you will not be caught under this law, or maybe you can have a direct selling. So then I proceed to the next. This thing is dual pricing. This dual pricing is also was discussed in the EU when the European Union did a market study on e-commerce. So this market study was concluded in May 2017. So under the current EU rules on dual pricing, manufacturers are generally prohibited from charging different wholesale prices for the same products to the same retailer, depending on whether the products are sold offline or online. So it's a system, because in Europe, online, offline, there's plenty of more of online rather than offline. I mean, it's always on. So dual pricing is often viewed by stakeholders as a potentially efficient tool to address the free riding aspect. They argue that dual pricing may help to create a level playing field between online and offline sellers, taking into consideration difference at the cost of investment. Obviously, in the online, you don't invest much, except the investment which you buy a software or whatever you got your hardware and all that. But in offline, you have to invest a lot. So there has to be price differentiation between the two. That's what it tries to justify. So at the same time, when manufacturer sets a different wholesale price for the same product to the same retailer, mind you, in the Europe, what we're talking is a hybrid retailer. So a retailer has both offline sale, also online sale. So depending on the resale channel through which the product is sold, offline or online, and practices where the manufacturer sets a different product, different wholesale price for the same product is bad. So what the new pricing means is that the dealer can have different prices for its online and offline sale channel. But as a manufacturer, you may not be able to do that. That's what is the meaning of this. So, and use of website by the retailer is considered as a passive selling and not as an active selling, which can be restricted by a manufacturer. So, in the under the European rules of this vertical restraints, passive selling cannot be prohibited, whereas you can restrict the active selling. That means you can set up a geographical area, for example, within which the dealer will sell, but it doesn't prevent the dealer from responding to the calls for purchase of the product from outside that area. So same applies to internet. So internet is considered as a passive selling, but it later on it has now been gradually it has come like internet is like active selling also. So any attempt to fix minimum resale price on internet is also considered an RPM. And I'll later on deal with this case of SOS, and now this is a very important case. I'll just come to that later. But so vertical block exemption rules prohibit manufacturer from preventing passive sales. So I was talking about this report of the European e-commerce sector inquiry, which was released in May 2017. And this report actually points to the possibility of exempting dual pricing agreement under Article 101(3) TFU on individual basis. So it's not that it's totally banned or it's totally prohibited. So dual pricing can be considered to be block exempted if there are justifications met. As I said, those 4 parameters of justification for granting block exemption. So for example, where a dual pricing arrangement would be indispensable to address free riding. So with this, I'll again involve my panelists quickly. We are running out of time. I have to be a little faster. So Mr. Bajpai, can you please come in once again, sir? I think we are running out of time. So maybe Mr. Bajpai, I'll ask instead of 2-3 questions, only one question because we have to conclude. And I'm sorry for my audience, we have to extend this session for about at least 15 minutes, if you all agree. This jurisprudence in India is very important. So Mr. Bajpai, just one question for you, sir. Will you notice the difference in approach between EU and US on treatment of RPM? Which is a better approach according to you? Do you think the approach of US of period of reason is better, or the I would call a form-based approach of European Union, where they are going standard-wise, market share-wise, which is better? Very
Mr. Sharma, I firmly believe that the approach that we have followed presently is the right approach. The rule of reason approach is the right approach. And the reason I say that is that I strongly feel that as far as Section 3 and Section 4 is concerned, there is need to create a lot of awareness in businesses about what are these practices, what is RPM, what is tie-in in sales, what is exclusivity, because small businesses don't understand this well. In fact, I can tell you from personal experience about in 2014, HUL tied up with Federation of Small and Medium Enterprises to conduct a series of awareness programs across the country on competition law. And we found that the level of awareness of competition law was very, very little and small. So therefore, there is no point, getting into the EU model, saying that these kind of practices will also be per se, when there is little awareness. So first important task is to generate awareness. And I think the Section 49 does refer to competition advocacy, but I think it is the job of all stakeholders to really develop that knowledge base, awareness. And also government should come out with a policy. I saw your piece the other day in Financial Express, which strongly suggested, and for rightful reasons, that the government should come out with a competition policy, which is provided for in Section 49. Something similar that government has done for the IPR policy, where they are also saying that IPR should be taught in schools. I strongly believe that competition law should be taught in schools so that
Thank you
there is
very much, sir.
understanding of these things at an early age.
No, absolutely, completely agree.
This approach is the right approach for India.
Completely agree, sir. I think I agree because we have not reached the stage of development what Europe has already reached. So in every jurisdiction, the stage of development of economy are different. In fact, when I was in CCI, one of my main mandate was competition advocacy only. So I was going across the chambers, various chambers of commerce, and telling them what competition, how it can benefit you. So we've been doing it since those, but still, as you rightly said, the awareness level is low. I completely agree, with particularly the small and micro enterprises.
Yes.
So with that, sir, thank you very much for your quick response, sir. Now I can request my friend Anand Sri to please come on screen and explain us through the major leading cases of jurisprudence on RPM. And I will request him to be a little faster because, as you know, already we have overshot the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sure you're going to say that, Mr. Sharma, you're putting me under a lot of pressure, but what can I do? You know, we're only short time. I'm sorry,
No,
I have to
sir,
put more time.
I will not be saying that explicitly. I'll be speaking about 3 leading cases on vertical price restriction in India and the legal principles laid down by the CCI in each case. Thereafter, I'll conclude by summarizing the evolution of the jurisprudence
Right.
over a period of
That's
time.
very important. Very important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which will set the stage for further discussion on the future application of the legal principles, especially
Right.
in its application in the digital economy by my distinguished co-panel. First case I would like to discuss is the FX Enterprises case, which is a series of 2 informations which was filed against Hyundai. This is the only case in India regarding resale price maintenance, which resulted in a penalty on the opposite party. However, it is to be noted that this case was set aside by the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal on appeal on certain procedural grounds. So the resale price maintenance aspect involved in this case was the imposition of a discount control mechanism by Hyundai on its dealers. So what Hyundai used to do is they would recommend a range of discounts that dealers are permitted to give, and pursuant to the recommendation of the discounts, Hyundai used to monitor dealers using a system called mystery shopping agencies. So what mystery shopping agencies would do on behalf of Hyundai is to monitor the discounts given by dealers, and if any dealer is found to have given a discount in addition to the range prescribed by Hyundai, they were penalized heavily up to 50 lakhs. And in addition to that, there was also a threat of stoppage of supplies to those dealers who were accused of offering more discounts. So,
Let's go to the next case.
no, sir. So the key takeaways from this case is that the CCI recognizes not just de jure application of RPM, where the seller prescribes the resale price made by the distributor or the buyer, but also de facto cases where, although there is no express stipulation of the resale price, the practice ultimately results in a resale price maintenance. This include fixing of the maximum range of discount, which is what was manifest in this certain case. In this particular case, the grant of rebates, which was connected to the adherence of a price level. For example, the supplier says, "I will give you 20% discount on the goods sold by you. However, you will only be eligible to this particular discount if you adhere to the price level that the seller mandates." Linking resale price to that of competitors. In fact, this particular type of resale price maintenance is viewed as a serious infringement because in a way it also fits at the interbrand level. That is, it facilitates collusion and ultimately it leads to price collusion between different suppliers. So that is the brief on the resale price maintenance aspect in Hyundai. Moving to the second case, this is a case filed by Snapdeal against manufacturer of kitchen appliances. So CAF is a manufacturer of kitchen appliances, and CAF's products were being sold at a discounted price on Snapdeal's platform. Therefore, CAF uploaded a caution notice to the effect that the products sold on Snapdeal are counterfeit and without authorization, and therefore CAF threatened to dishonor the warranties for products purchased through Snapdeal. An interesting aspect in this case, so pursuant to the caution notice, CAF, one of the employees of CAF, also sent a email to all its distributors, urging them to maintain a minimum operating price, and it was threatened that supplies will be stopped to those distributors who refuse to adhere to the minimum operating price stipulated by the seller. So what is important in this case is that CAF took a preliminary objection that the provisions of Section 3 Clause 4 will not apply to them because they are merely a platform, and it is the distributors who sell on the platform, and therefore there's no agreement between CAF and Snapdeal. The agreement only exists between the distributors. However, the CCI took a very broad view of the term agreement as well as the agreement of nature prescribed in the Section 3 Clause 4. What the CCI held was that the ownership of a product need not change hands down the supply chain. What matters is the value addition. If any level of the production chain or the supply chain adds value to the final, they will be part of the production chain. So the CCI took a substance-based approach rather than the form and proceeded to examine the case. However, in this case, there was no offense made out by the DG or the CCI because it was found that ultimately the threat was not carried out by CAF and they did not act upon it. So it merely remained a recommendation to the distributors, which was not implemented by CAF by any coercive means, unlike the case of Mumbai. Yes. The third case is the most recent case. It was passed in June of 2019. In this case,
I think, Anand, before you go to the next case, can I make a point here? In the previous case, the last bullet is very important. So the CCI actually declared that the online platform is also capable of doing RPM, though it is not actually selling a product. I think that point you we should have emphasized.
Sir, that
the online platform was considered as a though they say that we are not sellers because we are only matching buyers and sellers, but they said that you are also capable of doing up pricing and you can do RPM. So actual resale through the online platform was not considered as essential for considering a resale price maintenance. So that's what the take from the second case, very important.
So that is what I discussed in
the exactly. That's the bullet also was mentioned. Anyway.
So the resale price maintenance aspect was imposed on the distributors by CAF. So
correct. That's what the defense was. You're right. And that's what was not agreed by CCI. So they said no, even if it is not the online platform will also, although there was no RPM found. But the ratio, I think, is that.
The ratio was that they took the argument that they're not part of the agreement.
Huh. Anyway, come to the next one now quickly. Karni. Yeah, what Karni said?
So, Karni is the latest case on this point.
Yeah.
So again, there was a stipulation of a minimum operating price issued by the opposite party. It was challenged before the commission as constituting a resale price maintenance. So, however, the CCI at the prima facie stage itself, they looked at the overall market and held that that the opposite party, which is Vivo in the present case, they had very less market share, and there were a lot of competing manufacturers operating in the smartphone market. Therefore, what we can gather from the order is that the commission considered the market power of Vivo at the prima facie stage itself, and held that since there is fierce inter-brand competition and low market power of coupled with low barriers to entry and fragmented nature of the market, there was no possibility that the RPM would result in a AAC in the market.
Correct.
So summarizing the evolution of the jurisprudence, I'll summarize it in 4 points. One, that for a RPM to exist, there has to be an agreement between different levels of the production chain. However, for digital economy markets, an exception has been made, and it was held that what matters is the value that any level of the production chain adds to a particular product. So it need not be the case where ownership changes hands. Even if value is added, this will be construed as a agreement of the nature under Section 3 Clause 4. Secondly, once the agreement is established, the AAC has to be demonstrated by the CCI or the DG. So what we can see from the cases which have already been discussed is that the assessment of AAC is again an academic exercise by the CCI. There is no empirical analysis carried out by the CCI. Secondly, what we can see is that in the initial cases, for example, the Hyundai case and also the CAF appliances case when it was directed for investigation, there was no analysis of the market power of the party or the supplier who imposed the vertical restraint. So what we can say is that probably the CCI may have been influenced by the approach followed in the EU, where it is seen as a per se offense, and there was market share analysis. However, in the later case of Karni, there is a market share analysis at the prima facie stage itself, and the case was closed because of lack of market power. Thirdly, what we can see is that although Section 3 Clause 4 prescribes an agreement between parties, unilateral contact is covered under Section 3 Clause 4 of the Act. I mean, especially with respect to resale price maintenance. For example, in Hyundai and CAF, this was an allegation of the OEM imposing a condition rather a concurrence between the distributor and the manufacturer. Accordingly, penalty was also imposed only on the manufacturer. Thus, you can see there is no stipulation of an expression of common will. Fourthly, we can say is that the stipulation of a maximum retail price by the seller does not constitute an offense under 3(4)(e) of the Act. Only the minimum stipulation of the minimum price which causes a problem. And lastly, price recommendations are generally considered permissible by the CCI. It should be noted that the recommendation is not in the not in the form of a direction which is given to suppliers. If the recommendation is followed up or enforced by means of threat of a supplier or penalties, etc., then the commission is likely to see the recommendation as more of a concern. So recommendations are more or less allowed, whereas directions are seen under a more serious on a more serious note.
Right.
With that, I request my distinguished co-panelists to give their views on how the jurisprudence is likely to grow, as well as to add upon the points that I had highlighted.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you very much. You were quite lucid in your explanations. And I would just like to add a few points to this, that these three landmark cases which you referred in your discussion are basically the main cases which lay down the jurisprudence. But apart from that, there are one or two more issues which I think one must take into account. As you can see, we have summarized in these two slides. So the test remains that of appreciable adverse effect on competition, there's no doubt about it. But as far as the digital markets are concerned, the actual resale is not necessary. So as Anand rightly said, there is no requirement of showing change of hands or change of property from the manufacturer to the dealer. That is not required. So even if when you are a platform, you can be considered, your conduct could be examined. That's what the ratio is arising out of that first decision of the KEF Appliances case. As far as Hyundai's case is concerned, the what Charms also mentioned was in a passing that the NCLAT unfortunately set aside that order. So here I have a comment to make, because even I wrote a blog and I was, I'm sorry I had to say it was a type 2 error. That's what I considered at that time. Was unfortunately the NCLAT did not go into the merits of the main allegation, whether there was an RPM or not. The NCLAT allowed that appeal on a technical ground that the DG's report was considered as it is by the CCI. There was no inquiry sort of considered by the conducted by the CCI. It was a very hyper technical way of looking at it, because the evidence of discount control mechanism, the evidence of mystery shopping was all on record, and that's what the DG, it was DG's role to take out that evidence, and naturally CCI could either have controverted it with the another evidence which it had, or could have referred case back to the DG for re-examination. But the NCLAT, instead of doing anything of that sort, simply quashed that order on technical grounds, and it actually took, with all the due respect, that sent a very, very wrong message for the dealers in this country. Of course, this matter is now the CCI challenged that order in appeal in Supreme Court, so we'll reserve our comments on that. Apart from this, the issue which I'd like to mention here is that the car spare part case. So the moot issue of RPM in the aftermarkets for sale of spare parts in auto sector has not been examined by CCI till now. That's what I would like to bring here, because the Shamsher Singh Kataria case of that was the case regarding car spare parts only. The CCI did notice the exorbitant prices which are being charged by the authorized dealers of most of the brands in India. 1000%, 2000%. But since there was no allegation of RPM, CCI also did not examine. Why I'm saying this is that because the authorized dealers, all authorized dealers of a particular brand of car sell the spare part at the same price. It has to be investigated whether there is a competition between those dealers or not. If there is no competition between the dealer, then something is there. There is a possibility of this resale price maintenance going on in the OEMs, but that has not been investigated, unfortunately. So this actually is simmering or the underlying, kind of current with this possibility of this auto sector having this kind of issues of RPM came out in the case of Hyundai, and they have again come out in the case of Maruti Suzuki, which is being investigated. Since the matter is sub judice, I will not say, except that the allegations are more or less same as they were seen in the case of Hyundai. So there was mystery shopping allegation, there was allegation of discount control mechanism, there were allegations of emails being exchanged and things like that. Another case of auto sector which comes to my mind is that of Vishal Pandey. There was in the case of Hero Honda Motorcycles Company Limited. There also the case of RPM was very, very much mentioned, that the prices of the main product were being regulated by the manufacturer. So RPM of price of motorcycles. So these cases actually so far have only come out of the RPM with respect to the product itself, that is the car, the primary product. But the secondary product, that is the sales, as I said, aftermarket The spare part has not been investigated. It's a matter which is yet to be seen, and we leave it at that. So with that, I'll just quickly, because we are running out of time, so I will not be able to take more time on this, and I'll come straight away to the question of e-commerce. So these are the emerging issues which we have summarized in this slide, and I'm referring to the CCI market study of January 2020, which has highlighted the following issues, which we also discussed briefly in our presentation today, that the platform neutrality, so preferential treatment to preferred sellers by the platform's owned or related entities, and the contract terms between the platform and the vendor, the online vendors, are also allegedly unfair and one-sided, and the across parity clauses, that the wide parity clauses are applied by discriminate use of MFN clauses by online travel agents. Exclusivity is also concerned because the preferred sellers are given exclusive treatment. They are put under the search ranking. Their products are shown on the top, and of course the deep discount. So the e-platforms allegedly are funded by the individual investors or the large investors across the globe, and because of that they are able to give deep discounts to the preferred sellers. Of course, in the context of cab aggregators, things are directly discounts are being given because of the funding they have got. So these allegations are going around, and the issues of other issues which are there of introductory discounts or exclusive launches of smartphones brands, particularly in the festival seasons of e-platforms, which actually ends up excluding the online or small vendors or even offline vendors of smartphones. That is the issue which is still to be ranked, according to me, before the CCI, because the two cases which have gone to the commission against the Amazon and Flipkart, they are still sub judice. In the Amazon case and the Flipkart case, the High Court of Karnataka has already stayed the investigation, so we will not like to proceed and discuss with that in further detail because the matter is sub judice. And the case of NCLT's order, allowing the appeal of Online Vendors Foundation against Flipkart, though the order was in favor of the All India Online Vendor Association, and the CCI was directed to start an investigation. But I understand an appeal has been filed by Flipkart before the Supreme Court. So there is no stay. I'm not aware whether the stay is there or not. But again, the matter is sub judice. So these issues which we have discussed in much detail in the last webinar, I would like to stop here and like to take the questions. But I would still, before I take the questions of the audience, I will just involve Mr. Vajpayee once again. Mr. Vajpayee, can I take one small question from you? You can please unmute yourself, sir.
Yes, Mr. Sharma.
So the question to you is very simple. That the CCI market study, which I just summed up in the slide, do you think it has identified most of the burning issues on e-commerce? Because you are a company, as you said, you're also selling online. So do you see there may be some issues which they have not captured? If you can please give some light on that, sir.
I think it's a detailed report, and in one of the chapters are dedicated to competition issues. I think the report fleshes out all competition-related issues. And I also feel that, again, I reiterate my point on building awareness on some of these things, because unless people are made aware, and now online becoming so pronounced, and more so after the pandemic, it has become more pronounced. So it's important to deal with those issues and get some kind of a consensus. Otherwise, people will keep filing cases. They will get stayed by courts for some reason or the other, and we will not be able to make forward movement. I think the need of the hour is to really get consensus on some of these issues. And as far as e-commerce is concerned, I strongly feel that there should be an e-commerce regulator who has to look into all aspects of e-commerce. And at different, presently there is a DPIIT policy which is in the making. The Ministry of Consumer Affairs has come out with some regulations. There is the CCI report. I think these all have to converge somewhere. I know they deal with different issues, but all issues have to be put under one umbrella and they have to converge. And there should be a regulator for e-commerce who should act more like a facilitator to start with, because e-commerce is a growing platform and we have to give it all the encouragement to let it grow. So it's
Of course, it's a
important
huge
that we have that kind
potential.
of a concerted and an approach which is converging to deal with this whole issue before we just get into too many cases and things like that.
I completely agree with you. In fact, there is a huge potential for growth of e-commerce in India. We have just covered up 5% of the growth potential. Even in US, just 15%. So there are
Absolutely.
statistics which, in fact, this issue we dealt in the last webinar, so we are not repeating. But the e-commerce is itself a subject to be discussed at length. And I believe that e-commerce has lots of potential. Still, we have not covered. We are only confined to the metropolitan cities, the big tier 1 cities maybe. We have yet to reach to the tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, and e-commerce is bringing revolution in India. I mean, let us see the positive side of it. We got plenty of choices. The consumers are happy. So we can't certainly, because see, it's a dilemma for the government whether to see the consumer welfare or whether to see the competition per se. You see, in India, as I said in my article, we have to, unless we have a competition culture, unless we got a competition policy in place, the ruling government of the day have to look for the majority. And which is the majority? The consumer. So if the large consumers are happy, the government will have to turn, other side with the competition issues. Let the CCI deal with them. So their issues will keep on arising. But the underlying point is, the end of the day, what is the bigger majority of people, whether they are happy or not, they are happy. You can't deny it. So with that note, I feel that the e-commerce has a huge potential to grow further in India, and I think it should be welcomed, subject to the condition that it should not kill competition at the same time. It should not do anything unfair. So, for example, the Online India Online Vendor Foundation has this issue that my vendors, also want to sell on platform like say Amazon, for example, or Flipkart, they should be allowed a fair dealing in terms of the ranking of the products on their, they shouldn't be private labels. They should not be preferred sellers. The issue of competitive neutrality, or what I call it, network neutrality, or maybe the platform neutrality. This is the word which I have coined. By the way, this is a word which I have coined in an interview which I gave to CNBC TV. So the platforms have ceased to be neutral. So we need to have a platform neutrality in place. If the platforms are neutral, what they are like in US and EU, there are no deep discounts in US and EU. They are not. It's only confined to India. Why? So there are reasons which certainly can be looked into. But since we do not have time, so we'll just take quickly some questions which we have come, and I'll sort of see which maybe you would answer, or I will answer, or Anand will answer. So let us run it. I will take another 5-10 minutes quickly to take a few questions which have come to us so far. So the first question is pricing restrictions as heading is prohibited or allowed. So I think I will answer this question. The pricing restriction we explained is not prohibited. They are allowed, subject to certain exceptions, that they have to be within the nature which they don't foreclose the competition, and it depends on who's invoking those provisions. If you are a dominant player, if you can cause foreclosure, certainly it is not allowed. The second question is, although the target share might be equal, but the personal favors and help from company to particular distributors can obscure the reality. How can such instances be kept in check? That's a very interesting question, sir. Maybe you'd like to take. This is the context of the target rebates we were discussing. Somebody has asked, the target share might be equal, but personal favors and help from company to particular distributors can obscure the reality. How can such instances be kept in check? Your take, sir.
Look again, I come back to the point of appreciable adverse effect. You may be, again, like you rightly said, by itself, these restrictions are not, bad. But if you are dominant, if your conduct is different, if you end up leading to appreciable adverse effect in the market, because I would also tell your viewers to look at Section 19. Section 19 also talks about accrual of benefits to consumers. So it is, Section 3, subsection 4, market practices cannot be looked in isolation. One distributor, whether he has the capability or the market power to really, come in the way of market or pricing equation, will all depend upon the facts of a case. But ordinarily, the principle, like you've rightly articulated, is appreciable adverse effect on competition. And in my view, we should look at that. It can't be seen in isolation. One has to go back to Section 19.3 and then decide whether a case under 3.4 is made out or not.
Thank you. So you're very right that there cannot be a one size fits all approach. It has to be a case to case basis. So the next question is, sir, that has CCI ever considered huge margins between prohibitive MRP and actual cost of pharmaceuticals? So this is a question which, of course, is not belonging to the sector which you belong to. So maybe I'll take this question. So has CCI ever considered huge margin between prohibitive MRPs and actual cost of pharmaceutical? Well, excessive pricing in pharmaceutical is an issue, and the CCI is very well aware of it. And for the information of the questionnaire, let me say, CCI has also conducted a study on the pharmaceutical sector, where the margins of the pharma companies are also have been also highlighted. So the agreement between the say diagnostic tools and the other diagnostic companies and laboratories, etc., is also an investigation. So we actually did a webinar on this, and we can discuss this. You can send a questionnaire in detail. We can give you a detailed answer, because the answer to is that yes, the CCI is also examining that issue of huge margins with the pharmaceutical companies, and that's a fact, because in India we have mostly generic companies. So what happens is the originator companies, they keep on reaping the monopoly profits, and they also may have, like in the US or in the EU, we have cases of evergreening, agreements, reverse patent settlement. So there, all those practices, I'm sure, must be going on in India also. And there is one case which I will not name because the case is still sub judice, which is in which the CCI is also looking into that.
Only additional thing, Mr. Sharma, on pharmaceuticals is that as far as scheduled formulations are concerned, they are governed by NPPA control. There is also this concept of national list of essential medicines.
I know. NILP is there. NILP is
yes.
there.
Which also sometimes comes into play even if the drug is pretty generic and is used on a day-to-day basis. But if it is put in that list, then it comes into NPPA radar.
No, I know. I don't see. Pharmaceutical is heavily regulated, there's no doubt. But apart from even the regulated list, now they keep on increasing that list. But there are many drugs which are out of that list, sir.
Yes.
There are many generic drugs. Even the generic drugs in India are being sold as branded generics. So in India, the problem is not of generic, but branded generics. Yes. So in India, there's a perception, as we were discussing earlier, that something which is low price is bad. So what the pharmaceutical companies do is they have a co-marketing agreements. So moment their patent is going off, patent life is 20 years. So they just try to have an agreement with the local partner. They try to sell the same drug, which is off the patent, as a branded generic drug. So they keep on, making profits. As I said, we did a detailed study of a 3-hour webinar we did, and we had a general counsel of one of the leading pharmaceutical company and one of the leading hospital chain. We had that general counsel with us. We had 2 general counsels, and I was there. We had a discussion for 2 hours on the pharmaceutical sectors itself, competition issues. I mean, we can discuss that later on. So next question is, sir.
Sir, I just want to supplement the previous point.
Please tell, Anand.
Yeah, it's not just excessive pricing by pharmaceutical companies, which is an issue that the CCI is looking into. It's a markup by hospitals for their patients admitted to the hospitals are also something that the CCI is looking into.
Yeah, that's one of the issues. Yeah. Yes. So I agree. So I said we had a lot of issues which the CCI study has actually capsulated, and this is being investigated. So next question is, what can be done if reverse auction pricing adopted by some PSU buyers does not restrict lowest bid with reference to reasonable costing? That's a very interesting question. Does not restrict lowest bid with reference to reasonable costing. We're not very clear. Maybe Anand, do you understand what the question is trying to ask? Can you explain that? Would you like to take on this?
So I think what the question means is that what if there are instances where the PSU stipulates a benchmark price or
for buying,
for procuring a good, it stipulates a benchmark price and says all bidders should
bid
above this price, and whether this will be constitute resale price maintenance under the Act. I think that is the question. To answer.
So what do you say?
To answer that, this may not strictly fall under the definition of RPM, because the PSU in this case is a procurer, and this is not a case of the seller imposing a restriction on the buyer. This is
a reverse
condition. This is a case where the PSU as a consumer is procuring goods and it wants to maintain a certain standard. Probably that's why it is stipulated a benchmark price.
Correct. So you're right, because see, it's not a resale; it's actually a buyer. It's trying to impose a benchmark. So I will have to actually examine this. We can't give a straight answer to one has put up his views. But the point is that if it is anti-competitive, yes, because the competition law doesn't differentiate between a seller and a buyer. So if there is a monopoly, there is a monopsony also. So that PSU happens to be a monopsony, for example, is the only buyer. And if it does that, which somehow restricts the other suppliers from bidding, then certainly I think the case can be made out. So it's not simply that just because if it's a buyer, the competition law will not look into it.
Yes.
It can look into it.
I just want to add that maybe this can be looked into under Section 4, but
Yeah,
for cases under Section 3 Clause 4, buyers are
correct. I agree. That's why I said if it's a monopsony, then certainly abuse of dominance can be looked into. That's what I was saying.
Yes.
So with this, gentlemen, we come to the end of this webinar. We have already short time, and we are so sorry for that. But I hope it was you had taken some points from this. And we again now we'll request Mr. Charles Matthew to propose a vote of thanks.
I think we have missed out a question. There is question number 3.
Uh-huh.
It says, is there any time limit for CCI to dispose of any case?
I did not find that question to be taken because obviously this answer is, is there any time limit for CCI to dispose of cases? Maybe you answer that question. Okay.
Yes.
Is there a time limit?
There is no time limit prescribed under the Act. It depends upon the complexity of the matter and the capacity of the CCI itself.
So cartelization can be taken up any time. So the cartels are the hardcore violation of competition law. They are the most pernicious type. So there's no time limit for CCI to dispose of any cases we investigated about cartelization. So if I think the questionnaire wants to ask that is there a time limit for CCI to dispose of? Well, that's a very interesting question. So
is it to take cognizance of a matter or to dispose of a matter once the matter is?
No. Once the CCI enters into the investigation of a case, there is a time limit put up by a Supreme Court judgment. Normally 6 months. The DG is supposed to submit a report within 6 months. But the DG, in most of the practical cases which we have seen, it keeps with the extension from the CCI, the request for extension. Because why? Because the parties do not cooperate. In a cartel, unless the DG is able to evaluate all the evidence, it cannot submit a report. So it is because of this reason, because of the non-cooperation by the affected parties who try to play all the tricks up their sleeves by their lawyers, whatever they want to take time or whatever. So because of those reasons which are beyond the control of DG, because I've been in the CCI management, that's what I'm saying. Though it's not the fault of the CCI as such. It's the fault of like the old question of judicial delays. Why there are delays in the settlement of the cases? Why our judiciary is not efficient? So judiciary is not to be blamed, but it is the parties who are also equally to be blamed according to me. So because of that reason, the CCI is not able to dispose of the case of cartelization rather faster as it should have. So there are vested interests at play. I think that's all maximum it can be said about this. But there are no time limits set by the law. That I can certainly say, unlike in the case of merger regulation, where there are clear-cut timelines set. In 3 and 4, there are no timelines set, though they should be reasonably within a period of certain time. So that's it. So I think with this, we come to the end of this webinar. We have short also time. Charles Matthew, can you please do the formality of formal vote of thanks? Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for remaining patient with us. This was our webinar. So I would like to thank Mr. Dev Bajpai. It was a pleasure having you, sir, with us. Mr. M.M. Sharma and Mr. Ansri, thank you so much for the input. And I would like to inform the listeners that we'll be coming back shortly with another webinar very soon. Thank you. That was our time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bajpai. Thank you, Charms. Thank you, Charms, for this thanks, and thank you, Anand. And with this, we come to the end of this webinar. Thank you, viewers. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.